"You're lowering the value of the entire street with that eyesore." That's what she said. No introduction. No pleasantries. Just 6 words hissed through clenched teeth and a picket fence as white as her tennis shoes. I was still standing on the front porch holding a cardboard box labeled kitchen, sweat dripping down my back. I remember blinking at her, stunned, wondering if this was some weird welcome to the neighborhood joke. It wasn't. She didn't smile. Just turned on her heel and disappeared behind the immaculately trimmed hedge like a suburban ghost. That was my first interaction with Barbara Ellery, and it set the tone for everything that came next. My name is Raina Whitlock, I'm 34, and until 3 months ago I'd never owned a home. After 12 years grinding it out in a windowless design firm office in Seattle, and a divorce that left me more emotionally bankrupt than financially, I'd cashed out my savings, bought a used pickup, adopted a mutt named Pepper, and landed here. Pine Hollow, Oregon. Population, 2,104. Median age, 57. Vibe. Somewhere between Stepford Wives and a real estate commercial with a sinister undercurrent. But the house. It was everything I'd ever wanted. A 1920s craftsman cottage with original stained glass windows and just enough rot to keep the mortgage low. I planned to spend the fall restoring it by hand, one cracked tile and chipped stair at a time. I didn't realize my biggest problem wouldn't be the plumbing. It would be the neighbors. Barbara lived in the 2-story colonial next door, with flower beds so pristine I wouldn't have been surprised if the roses were fake. Her husband, Walter, was a silent fixture on the porch, a man-shaped shadow behind a newspaper who only nodded when spoken to. Their lawn was emerald green, chemically crisp, and religiously mowed every Saturday morning at exactly 8 a.m. Sharp as a military haircut. My lawn was in progress. But it wasn't the weeds that bothered her. It was the freedom. I let Pepper run in the yard. I played music when I worked on the porch. I painted my mailbox yellow. I hung up Edison bulbs and hosted 2 friends for dinner under the stars one night. That's when things really began. Notes appeared in my mailbox. Anonymous, of course. Typed, folded twice, no signature. Some of us value peace. This isn't the city. We will not be ignored. Then came the trash incident. 3 weeks after moving in, my garbage cans went missing. Just gone. I walked the entire block looking for them. Found one dumped into the creek behind the Ellery's property. When I mentioned it to Barbara, casually, smiling, giving her the benefit of the doubt, she stared straight through me and said, "Maybe you need to be more careful with your things." Things escalated quickly after that. A warning from the HOA. Then another. Then a notice that my front yard lighting violated Pine Hollow's light pollution policy. I tried to play nice. I took down the string lights. I started bringing Pepper inside earlier. I trimmed the lawn. It didn't matter. They weren't trying to correct behavior. They were trying to erase me. I found out later that the Ellery's had lived on the block for 29 years. Barbara ran the HO like a personal fiefdom. She'd gotten 3 families to move out over the last decade. One for repainting their shutters too boldly, another for keeping chickens, and the third for simply having too many guests. Pine Hollow wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a curated exhibit. And I didn't fit the aesthetic. Still, I wasn't afraid of her. Not then. Not even when the lawsuit came. The day I was served, it was sunny. I'd just finished painting the porch railings a soft seafoam green and was sipping lemonade when a man in khakis stepped out of a black sedan and handed me a beige envelope. "You've been served," he said, like it was nothing. Like it was normal. The lawsuit listed multiple charges. Public nuisance. Zoning violations. Disruption of community standards. Emotional distress. All from my neighbors. All of them signed. Not just Barbara. But Walter. And the retired couple across the street. And even the high school teacher who lived 2 doors down and used to wave at me when she watered her begonias. I stood on my porch, envelope trembling in my hands, listening to the wind rustle through the trees, wondering how something so surreal could feel so quiet. They weren't trying to find me. They wanted me gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with legal papers spread out around me, Pepper curled at my feet. My fingers ran over every line of the complaint, rereading phrases like willful disruption, unsuitable behavior, and intentional degradation of property values. I'd been here less than 3 months. And they'd declared war. But they didn't know me. Not really. Because if they had, they'd have known one thing. I don't back down. The lawsuit wasn't about money. It wasn't even about law. It was about control. I realized that the second I walked into the courtroom. Barbara was already seated, of course. Front row, pearl earrings, hair sprayed into a helmet of defiance. Walter sat beside her, spine straight, arms crossed like he was guarding Buckingham Palace. Behind them, 3 of my other neighbors, including the retired army vet who once asked me to borrow jumper cables and now apparently thought I was a threat to national security. Their lawyer was a man named Merritt Gables, a name so ridiculous I almost laughed when the bailiff said it. He looked exactly like the type of person who thought the HOA should have police powers. Pinstripe suit, pocket square, the whole nine. His tie alone probably cost more than my kitchen remodel. I wore jeans, a blazer I hadn't touched since the divorce, and a stubborn refusal to shrink. The judge, Honorable Diana Kessler, was brisk and sharp-eyed. She looked at the plaintiffs, then at me, then back at the stack of paperwork on her desk. "This is a preliminary hearing over a neighborhood nuisance claim?" she asked, flipping through the packet like it bored her. "You've submitted 67 pages of supporting documents." Barbara smiled like it was a compliment. "Your Honor, this is a matter of peace, order, and community values." "No one was harmed?" the judge asked. "No one was injured?" "No," Merritt answered. "But then let's not treat this like a felony case," Judge Kessler snapped. "Miss Whitlock, would you like to respond?" I stood slowly. I didn't have a lawyer. Couldn't afford one, not with my remodel half-finished and my savings bleeding out. But what I did have was a full-color binder of every letter they'd sent, every HOA notice, every photograph of their cars blocking my driveway, every time-stamped video of Barbara marching onto my property to measure the height of my grass with a ruler. Literally. A ruler. "Your Honor," I began, keeping my voice calm, "I believe what's happening here is targeted harassment disguised as legal action. I've complied with every HOA notice. I've removed all exterior lighting after complaints. I've kept my dog indoors after 7 p.m. I've responded to every letter, even the anonymous ones." Judge Kessler's eyebrow rose. "Anonymous?" I slid one of the notes across to the bailiff. Typed. Folded. No signature. The judge read it silently. "You're turning this block into a ghetto." Her voice was dry. "Charming." Merritt tried to object, but the judge cut him off. "I've seen enough. I'm dismissing the nuisance charge pending further review. Ms. Whitlock, you are free to go." Barbara stood up. "But, Mrs. Ellery, this is a court, not a book club," the judge snapped. "If there's real harm, you'll need to prove it. And so far, all I see is someone trying to live quietly in a home they legally purchased. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Because people like Barbara don't lose gracefully. They don't lose at all. What came next wasn't legal. It was personal. First it was the drone. A tiny black quadcopter buzzing outside my upstairs window one morning while I was getting dressed. I slammed the shutters shut and filed a police report. They said unless I had video proof of where it came from, there was nothing they could do. Next came the anonymous complaints to animal control. 3 in 2 weeks. Pepper wasn't even barking. He was recovering from dental surgery. Still, I had to bring him in for an inspection. Then came the rumors. People I barely knew, folks I waved to on my walks, started crossing the street when they saw me. My deliveries got misplaced. My mail started arriving already opened. And one afternoon I found a fake eviction notice taped to my door. That night I broke down. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet, exhausted sob into my kitchen counter while the kettle boiled behind me. I was tired of fighting. Tired of pretending it didn't get to me. I almost packed up. Almost called my sister in Colorado to say, "You were right. I should have rented instead of buying." But then something happened. A knock at my door. Not forceful. Not threatening. Just hesitant. It was Mrs. Darnell, the elderly widow from 2 streets over. She handed me a Ziploc bag full of oatmeal cookies and said, "I saw what they're doing. Not everyone here's like them. Don't give up. We need people like you." And just like that, the wind shifted. I wasn't the outsider anymore. I was the resistance. The morning after Mrs. Darnell brought me cookies, I woke up with a new kind of clarity. Not rage. Not fear. Focus. I brewed a pot of strong coffee, opened my laptop and made a list. Not of people. Of patterns. I wasn't going to scream on social media. I wasn't going to march up to Barbara's porch and demand respect. No, I was going to build a case. Because if Barbara wanted to play power games, she'd chosen the wrong opponent. I used to do digital forensics for a real estate firm. You know, the kind of job where you spot hidden zoning loopholes and outdated land use restrictions buried in legal code that most people never read. I wasn't proud of it. But suddenly that skill set felt like a weapon. First step? The HOA. I spent 3 days going over their charter, their covenants, their enforcement policies. Turns out, Barbara had been violating her own bylaws for years. For example, her prized tulip border technically extended 6 inches onto city land. That massive American flag pole in her front yard? No permit. Her guest house. Registered as a shed. But I'd seen lights on past midnight more than once. I wasn't going to use this recklessly. I'm not like her. But I wasn't going to let it slide either. While I gathered documentation, I also made some calls. Quiet ones. To a local investigative reporter named Nico Vega, who had written a series of articles about homeowner abuse cases. To a housing attorney I knew from back in Seattle who offered to review the harassment pattern pro bono. And finally to the city's zoning board, just to ask a few questions. The chessboard was starting to take shape. And Barbara, he still thought I was a pawn. That Friday I got a note in my mailbox. No envelope. No signature. Just 2 words typed in all caps. Enough already. I smiled. He was scared. The next day I held a yard sale. Not because I needed the money, but because I wanted to see who would show up. I put out old books, framed art, half-finished craft projects. I played Ella Fitzgerald on a dusty speaker and offered free lemonade with a sign that said, "Welcome, friends. All are welcome." At first it was just Mrs. Darnell. Then a young couple from the end of the block. Then a woman named Tanisha who said quietly, "I've been wanting to meet you, but I didn't want to deal with her." Within 2 hours my lawn was full of people. Talking, laughing, sharing stories. And then it happened. Barbara showed up. She didn't walk. She marched, in a pastel blouse and white capris, flanked by Walter, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Miss Whitlock," she said, her voice tight, "this gathering has not been approved by the HU." I sipped my lemonade. It's not a gathering. It's a private yard sale. Perfectly within City Ordinance 3.1.4. No permit required unless amplified sound exceeds 80 decibels or sale spans more than 2 consecutive days. I called the city to confirm. Barbara blinked. She hadn't expected me to know the code. She certainly hadn't expected me to cite it from memory. Behind her, I could see Nico Vega with a camera phone in hand, pretending to look at used vases. "I'm going to report this," Barbara snapped. "Already did," I said cheerfully. "To the HOA and the city. Both approved it. Got it in writing if you'd like to see." She stared at me for a long second. Then she turned to go. But before she left, she said something low enough that only I could hear. "You think this makes you strong? You don't belong here." That's when I felt it. Not fear, not intimidation, but relief. Because now I knew. It had never been about me. It had always been about control. About someone who built a tiny kingdom on a quiet street and thought she could gatekeep it forever. No. That kingdom was cracking. It started with a whisper. Then a text. Then a knock at my door at 7:42 a.m. "Do you have a minute?" the woman asked, her arms crossed, her eyes nervous but direct. Her name was Amy Conrad, and she lived 5 houses down in the beige ranch with the hanging porch swing. "I heard you're doing something about Barbara," she said. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just stepped aside and let her in. He brought coffee. I brought out the folder. My now-inch-thick binder of documentation, complaints, correspondence, city permits, HOA bylaws, even screenshots of neighborhood group posts that had mysteriously disappeared after someone started pushing back. Amy looked through it silently. Then she added something I hadn't expected. A photo. Taken 2 years ago. A broken window, shattered flower pots, and a flyer that read, "You're not welcome here." It had happened to her family. They'd moved in, stayed 8 months, then left without saying goodbye. Everyone assumed it was a job relocation. It wasn't. "They told us Pepper was aggressive," Amy said quietly. "Said our kids were too loud. That our Halloween decorations were culturally insensitive. I should have fought. But I was tired." Her voice broke a little. "But you're not afraid of her." I didn't know what to say to that. So I just nodded. Because the truth was I had been afraid. But not anymore. That afternoon I printed 20 copies of a simple flyer. Have you received HOA threats, anonymous letters, or legal intimidation for minor property violations? You are not alone. Let's talk. Saturday. 3 p.m. Raina's porch. I expected 4 people. 14 showed up. Old, young, married, single, white, black, Hispanic, queer. Turns out Barbara's version of keeping the neighborhood pure had a very wide definition of wrong. Each one of them had a story. A single dad fined for letting his daughter draw chalk murals on the driveway. A woman told to remove a pride flag because it clashed with seasonal decor. A couple cited for improper fencing, even though Barbara's own fence was grandfathered in with no paperwork. It was all there. Patterned, predatory, and calculated. What she hadn't calculated was us. That week we filed a formal petition with the HOA board. Not just a complaint, a vote of no confidence. Barbara had held her position for nearly a decade unopposed. Because people were afraid. Because no one had bothered to run against her. Till now. Amy volunteered. And I offered to manage her campaign. We made flyers. Held meetings. Knocked on doors. And the more people we spoke to, the more cracks appeared in Barbara's foundation. She tried to fight back, of course. Her emails to the HOA board grew longer, more frantic, more unhinged. She called my lemonade stand a calculated act of rebellion. Said I was radicalizing the neighborhood. But here's the thing about power. When it's built on fear, it only takes one person standing up for the whole thing to collapse. And that collapse started when I got a phone call. From Nico Vega. His article had gone live. Front page of the Pine Hollow Gazette. The HOA Queen and Her Court of Fear. An investigation into the dark side of suburban rule. It included interviews with 5 families who'd left the neighborhood under pressure. Financial records showing Barbara used HOA funds for emergency landscaping on her own yard, 3 separate times. A zoning violation she tried to bury last year after building a gazebo without inspection. It was damning. And it was public. By Monday, the HOA board had called an emergency meeting. Barbara wasn't invited. And for the first time since I moved to Pine Hollow, the street felt quiet. Not in the tense, waiting for a fight way. In the peaceful way. Like something heavy had finally shifted. Like maybe this place really could be home. Just when I thought it was over, she came back swinging. 2 weeks after the article dropped, I was sipping tea on the porch. Pepper snoring at my feet, campaign flyers still fluttering from the mailbox, when a thick cream-colored envelope landed on my welcome mat. Another lawsuit. Only this time it was personal. Barbara wasn't suing through the HOA anymore. She was suing me. For defamation, harassment, and willful emotional damage. I read it twice. Then a third time. Then laughed. Out loud. For a full minute. Because that's what people like Barbara do when their kingdom burns. They try to take someone down with them. According to her lawyer, I'd organized a smear campaign, deliberately manipulated public opinion, and incited hostility against a respected community leader. She wanted damages. A public apology. Retraction of the article. She wanted me to crawl. Instead, I called my attorney. Not the Seattle guy this time. A U1. A woman named Melanie Kwong, local, sharp as glass, and known for being quietly lethal in court. She read the complaint in silence, then said, "She's bluffing. But she's dangerous. Let's not underestimate how far she'll go." And Barbara went far. She showed up to court in a navy pantsuit and crocodile heels like she was accepting a Lifetime Achievement Award. She brought character witnesses. She wore pearls. She even dabbed at her eyes when her lawyer described the irreparable harm I'd supposedly caused her sense of dignity. Melanie leaned over and whispered, "You're not going to believe what I'm about to do." Then she stood up, walked to the front, and handed the judge a USB drive. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "this contains security footage from the defendant's home surveillance system, installed legally, showing Mrs. Ellery trespassing on her property 6 separate times over the last 90 days. The courtroom went quiet. Barbara's lawyer turned red. Melanie continued. Also included, a voice recording of a conversation between Mrs. Ellery and a former HOA board member, provided voluntarily, where she describes Ms. Whitlock as, and I quote, "a virus that needs to be removed." Barbara's jaw clenched. Hard. But it didn't stop there. Melanie then handed the judge a separate file, this one from the state licensing board. Your Honor, you'll find that Mrs. Ellery has been operating under the title of HOA compliance consultant for 2 years. A position which, according to city code, requires certification she has never obtained. The judge blinked slowly. So, Melanie finished, she's not only misrepresented herself on legal documents, but collected HOA consulting fees while doing so. Barbara's lawyer asked for a recess. The judge denied it. Instead, she looked directly at Barbara and said, Mrs. Ellery, if you wish to continue with this suit, I suggest you retain personal legal counsel. And prepare for a countersuit. Because right now, the evidence overwhelmingly suggests that the only one who's been harassed is the defendant. Barbara didn't cry this time. She didn't speak. He just stared at me. Like I'd just burned down her palace. The lawsuit was dropped within 48 hours. Without apology. Without statement. Just gone. But something in the neighborhood changed after that. Permanently. The whispers stopped. The glances faded. And one by one people started to smile again when they passed my gate. That same week the HOA vote was held. Amy won. Landslide. Barbara's resignation was voluntary, but we all knew the truth. And Walter? He waved at me that Sunday from his driveway. The first time he'd ever done it. I waved back. Because some battles don't end with a bang. They end with quiet. The kind that settles in after a storm and tells you it's safe to exhale. I didn't throw a party. I didn't pop champagne or shout, I told you so from the porch. When Barbara resigned, when the lawsuit vanished, when the whispers finally died down, I didn't celebrate. I just slept. 8 hours. Curtains open. Windows cracked. No anxiety. No fear. Just the sound of wind moving through trees that weren't trying to punish me. It was the first real sleep I'd had in months. And when I woke up, I didn't feel victorious. I felt quiet. Which is what I'd been chasing all along. But peace, real peace, isn't passive. You have to choose it. You have to make it for yourself. And sometimes, that means closing doors with your own 2 hands. So I wrote a letter. I didn't mail it. I didn't even print it. I just typed it, read it once, and let it sit in my drafts folder like a final word that didn't need to be spoken. Barbara, I'm not angry anymore. You tried to break something in me that I spent years putting back together. You tried to isolate me, silence me, make me small enough to leave quietly. But I stayed. I stayed and I grew louder. Not because I hate you, but because I refused to become you. The next day I did something wild. I planted sunflowers. Right along the fence that divided our properties. Tall, bright, unapologetic stalks of yellow that swayed toward the sun. Barbara was still living there technically. Though no one had seen her on the porch in weeks. The neighborhood had turned. Amy was running open workshops to revise the HOA charter. The couple across the street painted their shutters neon green. The chalk murals came back. Even Walter, of all people, took up gardening. Slowly, quietly, like he didn't want to admit he was finally allowed to have a hobby. Me. I rebuilt. Not just the porch or the stairs or the cracked tile in the hallway, but the life I thought I'd lost after Seattle. I turned the spare bedroom into an art studio. I let Pepper nap in the sun and bark at squirrels again. I drank coffee barefoot on the front step with music playing softly from the kitchen. The kind of peace Barbara had tried to steal from me, I took it back. And then I shared it. One Saturday morning I got a knock on the door. It was a teenage girl I didn't recognize, new to the block. Her family had just moved in. She looked nervous. We're not sure if we're allowed to have guests over, she said. Our old neighborhood had rules about that. I just smiled and handed her a slice of banana bread I'd made the night before. You're allowed to live here, I told her. That's the only rule now. And as she walked back down the path, barefoot, smiling, I felt something shift inside me. Not victory. Not revenge. Just peace finally given roots. I didn't destroy Barbara. I revealed her. And in the end that was enough.